We're recording. We're live. Yes, we are, I think. Make sure Facebook is catching up. All right, we're on. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being with us today. The Digital Roundtable is back. The crew is ready. You might have noticed that our Llewelyn King is wearing a dashing cowboy hat today.
The eyes of Texas are upon you all your livelong days. The eyes of Texas are upon you. You cannot get away. Do not think you can escape them. Night to early in the morn, the eyes of Texas are upon you till Gabriel blows his horn. Welcome to the state of Texas. I like that hat.
I'm just trying to fit in with this Texas-centric approach of this program.
Wait a minute. We're a global program. That's what we have to do. You are the East Coast and the farther East Coast.
Well, you know, in Texas, global is stopping at the borders of Texas.
I understand that Austin is antithetical to the rest of Texas. So
Well, they say that. It is more like Northern California to me.
that
You know,
Austin,
I am a true Southerner. I am from Southern Louisiana. And Texas feels like Northern California to me. It does not.
I'm told that Austin, and I want to tell you that I once addressed the legislature in Austin, that Austin could be picked up at its entirety and deposited in New England and nobody would notice.
Well, I don't think that's quite true. Or we hope that's not true. I would say it's a unique Texas city that has grown with the aid of George Kosmeski and Andre Carvallo and and it's the center, if you will, of Texas. I think it has an interesting reputation on the political side. We got to remember when I got to Texas, you know, I've been a registered Republican all of my life because all blacks were Republican in the South when I grew up.
Yep.
And then all the whites got into the Republican Party. That's like, to me, that's like putting a Klan suit on. You know? Because the Republican Party is the party that, you know, that won the Civil War. And I can tell you this, Andreas, when I was growing up, white Southerners hated carpetbaggers and Republicans. But like I said, things do change.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's good to be here and good to see that hat, Llewelyn.
Thank you very kindly. Thank you. I don't get a lot of opportunity to wear it, so this here it is. I've had it now for quite a few years.
Absolutely. So lots going on, guys, in the world. So it seems like, give me the latest. So I have a feeling, and we seem to have a feeling here that, you know, this is opening up a little bit. Things are, you know, sort of tending back to how do we get back to normal. Everybody's talking about June, July. Some people talking about August. Things will be happening full time. Where are we? Are things getting better or worse?
I think that we're in limbo. I think there's a lot of danger that we're going to recover faster than we are. The numbers are not good. We have over 70,000 dead. We're losing 2,000 people a day. This is not a pretty picture. Because there's some decline in the rate of infection in New York and other places, there were hotspots. That does not mean that we're over the hump. It does appear that the contamination, the virus, is now moving into rural areas, less equipped to deal with it than, say, New York City was, and that was ill-equipped. So the immediate prospect of us returning to normal, I think is hopeful but unrealistic. And if we do it too fast, we're going to have a surge of infections and deaths, and we're going to be very sorry for it.
Right.
Well, I think that in actuality, people have opened things up. And I think the question is, I think you're absolutely right. The question is, what's the measurement? And we know that there should be a almost automatic correlation between the amount of testing and the number of cases that we see. I think the big question is the number of hospital beds that's empty, the number of people who are dying, and the number of people who survive. So to me, it's that you get in trouble when the hospital beds are there are not enough hospital beds. There's not enough personal equipment to protect you. So maybe the best number is not just the testing, but what's the relationship between the testing and the number of hospital beds. So I think what's going on, like I know what's going on in New York, and I do agree that it is moving into the rural areas, that the curve has gone down as measured by people who are actually dying. But this thing has lots of faces, and what we do know is that that face is not always correlated with the same one that we started with. So there's a new virus, as we've talked about, that's in California. But I think the measurement is we know we're going to have more cases. The question is who's surviving it. That is, as measured by the number of hospital beds. And
well, I think you've also got to look at where your hospital beds are. They're not
where they are. That's right.
Not in small towns. An excess of hospital beds in New York is not going to help somebody in rural Ireland.
That's right. Yes, you have to control where you are. So when I say hospital beds, I mean for that area. So is it for the Austin area? Is it for the Lukenbach area? Is it for the Houston area? Is it for the Utah area? So it's the proximity, right? It's not the total number in the aggregate. Is controlling for where you are. Yes, sir.
I would like to put on the table something that has concerned me, and that is the rate to which, or the speed with which, we know the speed with which we're looking for inoculations. 100 different ways of preparing a vaccine are being tested, tried, experimented with. But we are not looking, I think, enough at engineering clean spaces. And by that I mean various systems, and there are such, for cleansing rooms. If we could, for example, guarantee that there is no virus in a restaurant, in a place of work, in your office, in the schoolroom, in a lecture hall at the university, and there is technology, but I've not heard it mentioned at a high level. There is a technology that seems to be very effective, which is to use a cold plasma, where you cool the air in the room rather than when you take all the air in an airplane and change it. You change all the air in the room, you put it through this device, which is not terribly expensive, and you have a habitable room. Unfortunately, the only manufacturer I know is totally overwhelmed, but there are other manufacturers, there are other ways. If we were putting the same emphasis on engineering, whether it is with face masks, with shields, with devices for grocery stores, and particularly anything where you can take the room and the air in a given space and say it is safe. If you had that, you could open up a huge amount of the country without a corresponding increase in infections and deaths.
I've thought a lot about that cleanliness, and I go back to my Boy Scout days with Mr. Hollis, who would take us down to Lake Pontchartrain, and my tent mate would say, "Oh my gosh, this is very, very nasty." And Mr. Hollis, who taught us biology and chemistry, would say, "Well, being exposed to different kinds of germs is really good for the system." That is, there's some point, and I don't know because I don't study this, although my sister does it. There's some point when we ask, what's the purpose of germs in the human body? Now, again, I go back to my biology class, and I was told this. The more we expose ourselves, we ate dirt, put our hands everywhere, then the immune system was better prepared because the immune system was there, now a part of you. I wonder, just wondering out loud here, not as a biologist, but certainly as a social scientist, that if there is too much cleanliness, you can never have enough cleanliness.
Sure.
And I think that there is a situation where we have locked ourselves in, and we've been so clean that when we re-enter the world, there are other things besides the virus that might affect us. So I'm just wondering out loud, as we clean ourselves, there is a science which said that the more you get exposed to in the world, whether you're eating dirt or putting your hands, on unclean surfaces, then the more your immune system reacts. The problem now is we know nothing about this virus because our immune system has not seen it. So I agree with the cleanliness, but my question is, can it be too clean in terms of the overall infrastructure of the human body?
Well, that's possible. There's a great deal known about over cleanliness. Hodgkin's, the disease, they say the cancer, they say that is a result possibly of much cleanliness. Japan, which is very germ conscious, is said to have problems because there isn't a natural balance. But that doesn't mean that you can develop a tolerance for a virus. There's no evidence that this virus or that herpes or any of the other persistent viruses that have plagued humanity for a very long time, that you're going to build up any immunity to them.
And that's why we have vaccinations, because everything is still here. The bubonic plague is still here. Polio is still here.
That's right, but we're immune because of vaccination. We're not immune because of any evolution in our own system. It's a very interesting question, and it's a legitimate one. I personally believe that there is a tendency in advanced society to get too excessively clean. Where you have the septic tanks, I mean, what is a reasonable discharge into groundwater from a septic tank? And I know people who say that we set the standard way too high. I don't know that, but this is not what we're talking about.
So speaking of solutions, there seems to be, again, the American ingenuity and entrepreneurship, and I'm sure that it's happening in other countries, but there's stuff going on. Pittsburgh International Airport started deploying germ-killing robots made by a company called Carnegie Robots, obviously a Pittsburgh company, offshoot of Carnegie Mellon. And these robots use ultraviolet lights and they drive around the whole airport and clean all the surfaces, the floor, everything that has a surface. And that's what Pittsburgh International Airport is doing. So just, hear me out for a couple more seconds here. IBM just issued the winners of a Code Global Challenge that they issue in March. And there are 3 apps that are the winners. One is called Are You Well? And it's a medical assistance system tracking systems per patient and levels of risk. So basically a tool for the CDC type people, for the health givers. There's another application called COVID Impact, which is a predictive assessment application that forecasts financial risk by population location. This is an interesting one, right? Because there's a challenge here about how long do we stay closed, what happens to the economy, So now there's an app that helps with that. And then there's a new app called SafeQ, which is an app for managing social distancing indoors while shopping. So, when you go shopping indoors to your supermarket or some of these box stores, they have a bunch of people, workers, telling you, make sure that you're in line, make sure that you're so far apart, right? So now these guys have created an app that if you have it in your phone, it tells you where you are on the line, when to move, how far to move back, So again, we are creating solutions to how we go forth on this. So any thoughts?
Well, I think this is very commendable, and that is the engineering. I use engineering for that, the engineering that is going to make a difference. As to ways of cleaning things, I've looked into those somewhat in my reporting, and certainly you can do it with ultraviolet light, but you need special conditions for it. But ultraviolet light is a very effective cleanser, as you can do it with ionizing radiation, but there are very few situations in which you can use ionizing radiation, even in small doses. And there is a lot that you can do in a confined area with various mists that have a very powerful effect. But sometimes the air is so contaminated by the decontaminant that human beings can't go back into it for an hour or 2 hours. That is a limiting factor. But these things are coming on fast, and they will be with us, and we will certainly look for this. For example, for a long time, airlines have wondered what they can do about spreading the common cold, where you have recirculated air. And this is true of almost any form of transportation. If we're an intercity bus, we're going to get a lot of good stuff coming out of this. But the central issue of the virus and how it spreads, that is not going to be resolved until we get an inoculation that is cheap, affordable, and can be widely dispersed quickly. Then we can go back to work, and then we can assess where we are and how we rebuild the economy. And the economy we rebuild may not be the economy we had.
Yeah. Absolutely. As Llewelyn 2 weeks ago, and we talked about these things and predicted these things. It reminds me of, I was walking to a football game, and I walked by an automobile, and the automobile said, "You are walking too close to me." I wonder if we get to the point where you have an app where a person would say, "You are walking too close to me." One of the things we have to also understand is that we can have all the tools, but we have to get people to actually utilize the tools. For example, as I sit here, being a Vietnam veteran and faced a lot of stuff, if I die because I touched my face, I'm going to be really mad. Okay.
Yeah, that's very well said, John. I like that.
I just think that with all of the technology that we have, and we have talked about this before, with all of the apps that we have, the question is, will Americans respond? We have had different instructions as to how to get from point A to point B, and quite frankly, there has been a revolution against all of those directions. So the question, if I may pose a question to my distinguished colleagues, is we have lots of technologies. The question is, who will use the technologies? Are we living in a world where people you must use the technologies? Are we living in a world where there was a fight in some parts of the country because the police told somebody to do something? Here in the great city of Austin, Texas, a park ranger told people that they should really, really distance each other, and they threw him in the lake. So there has been a revolution of sorts over what we should do. So with all of the new digital technologies that we've had, that we're getting, the question is, how do we get people to really utilize those technologies and perceive the threat as real?
Unfortunately, John, it takes generations. It took a generation to get seat belts adopted. Now we all click them on. My goodness, I remember where they came in, the hostility, the repair shops that put up signs, seat belts disconnected, because they had foolishly overdone it, and it was connected to the ignition, and you couldn't start your car without it, and it was monstrous, and they didn't fit very well, etc. But now we use them. It's taken us 60 years to really recognize the public health consequences of smoking. Smoking was known to have deleterious health impacts way back in the 1950s.
Yes.
It really wasn't until about 2000 that seriously we got rid of smoking in public places, in buses, cinemas, everywhere that we go. Now, you're quite a pariah if you smoke, whereas that took a long time to come.
Yes, and there's this idea in America that, we have the freedom to do this and the freedom to do that. So, I think that it would be just great to look at how people adjust and who adopts all of these new technologies. And you're right on with the flight stuff. for years they've been trying to manage the idea of a common cold around a flight, and for people have been telling us for years that the pull-out desk in the airplane is one of the nastiest places in the whole world. So as we try to move toward this idea of a consciousness of cleanliness, a consciousness of technology that would help us, all the tools that we have, will it take a generation? I agree with you. All the data shows that what they call millenniums, I call cohorts, the different cohorts moving through the years in different countries. Yeah. They did not believe in seatbelts. It's unbelievable. Yeah. There are still people in America who won't give shots to their kids for polio.
I heard a lot of people talk about cigarettes. They didn't kill my uncle, and he smoked till he was 90.
Right.
I stopped, and when you told them they had a 1 in 8 chance.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating question that I think would be answered in the future.
One of the 7 until they fought it. I actually had died from lung cancer who was a devout believer that it would not affect her.
Right.
So while we're trying to recover and figure out how we're going to open the economy, and I think that everybody agrees that I don't think that we could do it fast enough. But even though we need to be cautious and all that, the repercussions of having shut down now for 40 some days, 50 days or so, it started to show its ugly head. So Uber announced 14% layoffs, Airbnb 25% layoffs, Lyft 17% layoffs. The amount of bankruptcies, filings are off the charts, and obviously the number of unemployees is off the charts, right? At the same time, a lot of digital companies are going through the roof. Zoom, DocuSign, Amazon, and believe it or not, pizza delivery, old-fashioned Domino's, Papa John's, increased sales 50% in the last 50 days.
Well, I'm not surprised at any of that. It does tell you where the future economy is going to be. There's going to be, once we've gotten wholly used to delivery is going to be an even more important business, and technology is going to come along to help it with drones, various robotic delivery systems. Already that was changing. Amazon was changing that, and right. Walmart right behind them. But yes, we're going to see delivery as a big thing, and it's going to stay with us. It's not going to disappear. It may slow down when we do get out. The big problem we're dealing with is the very human one. We are tactile creatures. We need each other. We like each other. And we like to touch and to hug and even to shake hands, all of which are endangered social activities for the foreseeable future, which makes life a bit grim. We have no way around that. But many other things we can do something about, with shields, with cards, with cleaning the air in specific spaces, with dressing to protect ourselves, while we wait for the cavalry, which is medical science, to come riding over the horizon.
Do you guys think that, and John could chime in on that, on the prior topic, but do you all think that perhaps, the notion of a bodysuit that protects you from germs and all that, do you think that will ever happen? Like a large prophylactic of sorts?
Oh, well, I think it has happened already for firemen. It's already here. But everyday use, it's a possibility that anything can happen. There's a cartoon going around where somebody's dressed up all in this technology and you can't see their face, like somebody from outer space, and they say, "I'm going to the grocery store. Do you want something?" But let me just chime in on the previous conversation also. One of the things that we've learned in looking at this, in addition to how people adopt and everything that's been lost, is the savings of America. That is, if you look at all the stuff I've read, the question is how many families could go 30 or 40 or 50 days without working? And I think this is a huge departure before, let's say, the credit card, which my grandfather called high-tech sharecropping. So I think one of the big questions that we have is, what percentage of Americans can go a month or 2 months? What do we do? Is a 401k really a savings plan? Do we need to make sure that we have in the future a defined kind of retirement? Because I wouldn't say I was absolutely amazed, because I know the data on savings. But when these things hit and we talk about the human element, we talked about what you guys just mentioned. We are humans, and as Llewelyn says, before technology rides in and save us all, and we look what happened in the last 40 days, how many Americans can survive this? I mean, what's the relationship between what we're doing in savings? What's the relationship between companies saying there's no more defined retirements in a way anymore? Now you have a 401k.
Right.
I think we need to think about those kind of things also, in addition to thinking about, are we going to have an armor suit in the future as we go out? I would like to get Llewellyn's comment on the relationship between how many days can we go on the average, in America or in other countries. Are we all living beyond our means?
Well, I'll tell you right now, across this country, there are enormous number of families, in the many millions, suffering. They do not know where they're going to get the money to pay the rent or buy the next meal. It is a critical situation, and nothing we're dealing with do we have the tools to handle. We're going to have to rethink. You put it in terms of saving, I put it in terms of the social network. We may have to introduce new dimensions in the social network to cope with unemployment that is going to be part of the residue of this crisis and may last 1 or 2 or 3 years with very well-intentioned people that have no ability to go out and earn a living. We saw it once before. We saw it in the Great Depression. We may see it again. There were solutions. It took a long time for them to be developed. I mentioned on this program previously, maybe the Works Progress Administration was an example. We're going to have to put people to work, and if they cannot find work in their traditional lines of employment, we're going to have to find, hopefully constructively, new work for them. What you're going to do is to create a cohort, use your word, John, a cohort, I like it very much, a cohort that's wholly dependent on government handouts. That is not a constructive thing in a society. The dole does not help society. Constructive work, which was true of the WPA, which may be true of some future program, does, but it is not going to be solved in a week, a month, 2 months. If the virus were eliminated from the face of the earth tomorrow, we would still have a shocking unemployment problem.
Are we on the verge of a revolution of people needing to get back to work and violating any shutdown and rules imposed by the elites and the government?
Well, as Llewelyn said, we are a social people. We like being around each other. But the other reality is we also have to make a living. We have to eat. And as you said in your comments, there are enterprises now that's booming. So the delivery pizza service is booming. On the other hand, there are enterprises that's absolutely dying. So if you look at what people are, look at what's the risk. Okay, so if you can do a risk analysis, we have the data to do a risk analysis. This is uncertainty. We don't have the data to do an uncertainty analysis. I can tell you what the probability of you having an accident on 5th Street is, but I can't tell you what the probability of an earthquake happening in California. When people say it's a 1 in a million chances of happening, they really don't know that. So I think what people do is they analyze the risks and rewards. I know it might be risky out there, but I have bills to pay, and life must go on. So I think as we look at this thing and look at what individual people are deciding and put them in a risk rewards kind of situation, I wouldn't call it a revolution in the true sense of the word, but it might be a revolution against policy. to say that, look, okay, you're making this policy, but you're fine. You know, I've been working as a person in a restaurant, and my tips now are gone. My salary is gone. So what's the risk and reward? So Andres, I wouldn't call it a revolution in the traditional sense, but I would call it a rejection of policy based on a risk-reward kind of situation.
But John, if 50 million people in America are in the verge of bankruptcy and they cannot pay for their next meal, this is serious.
Oh yes, oh yeah, it becomes serious. If you look at well, if you do it on a country basis, I think right now America has, I think we've discussed this, America has the resources, right, to really take care of its people. Case closed. We do. Well, what about other countries? What about other countries around the world? So if you go back historically, you might have dictators invading other countries. You might have people taking food from other countries. And so in a global kind of concern or activity that we're in, we have to be concerned not only with what happens here, but what happens in other less developed countries.
Right.
I cannot disagree with anything that you said, John. I heartily endorse it. One of the things you will see is greater migration. Now, it's hard for very large numbers of people to get into this country, but there are countries that are fairly easy. Europe is one. There's going to be a huge migration of people from Africa into Europe and from the east of Europe into the north of Europe, wherever it appears to be better work. I would also like to point out that we're going to have industries that are damaged. They're not destroyed, but they're damaged. A case in point would be the airline industry. It is going to be several years before we get anything like the old airline traffic we had. That means a lot of jobs lost. You take the entertainment industry, or the hospitality industry, as they like to call it. If people aren't flying around, they aren't staying in hotels, they aren't going to Disneyland, etc., damaged. All of these damaged industries are going to throw off furloughed or laid off employees in the millions. And we're going to have to see what happens to them, how we take care of them, how we possibly find new employment for them, how they find new employment, new skills, and new adventures for themselves. It's not always totally negative, but it is very disturbing at the time. But at the low end, Andres and John, at the low end, it's going to be very hard for people who have been dependent on little more than the minimum wage or the minimum wage to get through this without some kind of social assistance. Otherwise, you may not get revolution, but you may get a crime wave because people who have nothing, no food to eat, have to steal it.
Absolutely. Our new WPA, for example, here in the state of Texas, we're experimenting with fast trains. I think the first one is about to launch between Houston and Dallas. And so can you imagine with me a situation where, I'm just talking about here in Texas, the Northeast has had it for a long time, where all of a sudden people are put to work making sure that this new mode of transportation takes place. That remind you that Amelia Earhart gave the keynote speech in the 1930s to the railroad barons of the day, and she said, as the smoke room was filled, she said, "Believe it or not, men, people will fly from coast to coast one day," and they laughed at her. So I think that these new business models that you talk about and how people will evolve. So we might go from airlines, and who knows, United Airlines might want to buy an airplane. I mean, might want to buy a railroad, a fast train, between Austin and Houston.
Right.
But one thing, things will not be the same, and you got to come up with new business models, Andreas.
Yeah. I like the thought, and I like the fact of the Amelia Earhart talking to the railroads, but no railroads made it into the aviation industry.
That's true.
Big corporations, established corporations, don't adopt new industries well or quickly. I said this previously. The car companies did not make the airplanes. Railroads did not operate them.
Yeah. Give me a break here. Give me a break, guys. I got to share my screen real quick. Digital 360 Summit coming up. I don't know if you've seen all the speakers, but here it is. Bada bing. Look at that. Look at that. And it's just an amazing lineup of folks. I'm so excited about that. And let me share real quick something else. If I knew how to toggle between things. Here we go. So it's August 18th through the 20th in San Marcos. It's got an amazing lineup. You saw where the speakers are coming from. Can't miss it. Go look it up, sign up. And then I want to say thank you to our sponsors, Smart Water Summit and Smart Utility Summit. I don't know if they have announced anything on their change of their dates. I assume not, but you know, we're grateful that they are hanging out with us. And so let me come back to you all. So there seems to be a lot of stuff going on with new kinds of jobs, right? And we have talked about the fact that maybe between the winners and the losers, there is a displacement of jobs and in a generational challenge. And so, you know, the top jobs, according to all the magazines: social media manager, 62,000 average salary; digital project manager, 83,000 a year salary; digital copywriter, 63,000; product designer, 96,000; user experience designer, 100,000. So, you know, I mean, going digital is the way to go. Working with a computer is the way to go. What's going to happen here, Llewelyn and John? I mean, Llewelyn, if you want to go first, how do we take the 5 billion people that don't do computer work? How do we get them engaged? What happens?
They have to do other things. Not everybody can work in computers. We are computer-centric at the moment when we think of technology and we think of the future. But computers are a very critical part of this, and they're a critical part of the future, but they're not the only thing. You were mentioned earlier, and almost jokingly, that pizza delivery. Well, the pizza has to be made, and all of the ingredients for the pizza have to be raised somewhere. The flour has to be milled. Of course, the farming, and we should really talk a little bit about the breakdown in the food chain that is going on right now. So you've got to think of things that will be benefited by computers, that will throw off jobs, but which are not per se computer jobs. I think it's very dangerous to be too computer-centric. I think computers are a valuable, useful tool, but I don't think they are a be-all or end-all for the future. There are other things that will emerge. You know, California has done very well with computers, but it used to do very well with growing food and making movies. There are very valuable alternative endeavors besides computers, and they're going to be with us going into the future. One of the things that's quite important is the growth in entertainment. People sitting at home have discovered how much they like to be entertained. Has never had such a prosperous period, and there may be a computer play at one level, but somebody has to make the movies, etc., and that's not a computer play. In those instances, computers are simply tools, as are the lights and the makeup. I just urge you to look what could be in the future that isn't computer, that doesn't have a keyboard. I think we are going to see a lot of artificial intelligence there take care of a lot of menial work, which doesn't help those at the bottom that are so concerned, John and myself.
Right.
I agree, but I think also, Andrea, there's a lot of renaming here. You know, as somebody who's always been a statistician, we're going to say, we're going to have a master of statistics. No, we better call it a master of analytics. Nobody's going to take a master of statistics. We need a statistician. No, we need a data scientist. Okay. So what has happened is, I think in terms of how people prepare themselves, I think there's a lot of renaming what big data has brought good old regression toward the mean and the binomial expression, all of those good statistical terms into vogue. So therefore, if you're a statistician, you could be a big data person. If you could be a front end developer if you know statistics. And I think that the tool is the computer. The software, if you will, is that individuals are being put into jobs and being redesigned into jobs. So it's easy to pay a statistician $50,000, but it's easy to pay a data analyst $100,000. So I think all of a sudden, a lot of the jobs that we see as new, right, are not.
Is that a call from the White House that you're getting?
No, not yet. That's tomorrow. That's tomorrow. So, but you're right. But let's go back to the lower end that we like to talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, there are lots and lots of things. Even the pizza deliverer has to know about the statistics, right? You got to know where the address is. You got to know, how to use these things. But as we've said here, it is the lower end. There are lots of new jobs being created. But the question is, what is the lower end?
So I'm curious.
You've got to look to what happened in the 1930s. What happened in the 1930s? We had, of course, the Great Depression.
Yeah.
But we also had a huge burst of creativity across the board. That was when automobiles were really perfected. That is when airplanes were perfected. That is when we had more musical comedies than ever. That is when talking movies were perfected. A lot of stuff happened in the 1930s in the midst of depression, much of it because people were not able to pursue their previous jobs, which might have been almost certainly somehow affiliated with agriculture. There was a huge movement to cities because people had nowhere to go, nothing to do, and there was enough creativity in this very creative land to cause these things I've just mentioned and many others to boom. We have a boom, but it's not going to be a indication of what we've lost. It's going to be something different.
And remember, we have the tools now to be more creative than ever before. The tools that we have, the digital age has made creativity, and even the start of a company. I mean, it's much less expensive now to start a company in 2020 than it was in 1999, because of the price of what's needed to be. Everything from a studio, to a printing press, home printing press. We do a lot of this stuff now. So a lot of our hobbies, as Llewelyn would say, the creativity will become enterprises in the future.
And now people can write books and publish them on the internet.
Yes.
You go through an agency and find somebody who's prepared to take the financial risk of putting out your book. It is a time of opportunity in a time of great difficulty.
So whose responsibility is it to drive, to create the roadmap, to train population?
It's got to be a political work. You've got to look to the leadership of the country, and we're not getting that leadership, because the whole political establishment is committed to returning to the past, and it's not available.
Yes, when I went to college, my father said, "Don't let a college education take away your creativity." It took me a long time to try to understand that, but I think that creativity is driven by what we've seen. It's driven by what we see in the home. It's driven by what we're exposed to. It's driven by people trying to solve problems, what they call out of the box, that used to be problems of necessity. Right. And I think that if you look at the drivers of creativity, I tell my students when they come to college, please don't let me disrupt the great progress that your parents have made, over the last 12 years. So I think that it's not so much a single institution that drives creativity. I think the single institutions drive research, looking into certain things in the laboratories. But business creativity has been around, and we are all drivers of business creativity. So if you look at Gary Hoover's great book on creativity and business models, Just take a pad with you, and when you have an idea to solve something, write it down. If you have a problem that you want to solve, write it down. And I think when you do that, then the creativity begins to blossom.
Yeah.
John, I couldn't agree with you
When you
more.
lose the job, the creativity can also blossom.
I couldn't agree with you more, John, and I like what you said about don't let it, or what your father said about don't let a college education interrupt your creativity. It's a point that I have tried to make, but less well, that we have such a reliance on college education, and it does stuff out a lot of that green shoots on the way to the acceptable plant.
Exactly. What has happened to, since my, when you go to college and et cetera, we become much more narrow. So quite frankly, when I went to college, it was, all right, let's go to college and, do the math, do the statistics, then we'll find a place for you to work, go meet the right people. It was never go to college and come out with a job. I think that changed in the 1960s when everybody started going to college. And there's a lot of people who would treat college almost as a trade school. And I think what has happened in this great crisis is that people will reevaluate that. Having said that, to me, college is a value structure of my family. As long as you finish college, you can go be a bomb.
Right.
Or whatever have. It's just a value structure.
Yeah,
But
that's the social.
what happens is we can really draw out the creativity of people. And in this real sense, the more education you get without creativity, the less creative you become. And you can look at managers and companies who cannot change the company, the organization. There's an old saying in management: you want to kill your company, give it to a non-creative manager. So I think that we got to be aware of those things.
So let me switch gears real quick here. So the president issued an executive order on last Friday on protecting the power grid, a national emergency executive order preventing foreign ownership of equipment and infrastructure and what have you, capital, to touch our power grid going forward. Any comments or thoughts of that? Is that the beginning of a new world order on all critical infrastructure, including telecom and everything else that we do, including airlines and everything we do? What's happening here?
Well, I think it's a return to something. I myself had a presidential appointment under George W. Bush, and I was amazed that we didn't produce our own bullets. I was amazed that we didn't produce our own airline components. And I just think what it says is that it's not any foreign country, right? It's adversaries. Mm-hmm. Those people who do not have the whole idea of the value structure of America, putting America at risk. So I think it says this: the internet, the electric component is so important in America now. You almost have to say, if you're going to buy a component to go on that system, it cannot be a component that would spy for another country. It cannot be a component that would hurt America. So, but it has to be purchased from a country, right, that's in our tradition rather than an adversary. So when I read it, I said, well, this is a return to the idea, right, that in wartime, you want to make your own bullets, you want to make your own airlines, you want to make your own bombs. So anything that's outsourced now that can be a threat to America, I think that's what the president had in mind. That's my interpretation of it. What do you think?
My interpretation of it is less grand. I think you're absolutely right in many ways. But the idea here, I think, is very simple: to punish the Chinese, who are the largest providers of this equipment. Going forward, it's not that easy to become a citadel, take up the drawbridge and flood the moat around America. It doesn't work that way anymore. For example, 97%, maybe it's down to 95%, that of the rare earths that are so vital in electrical components nowadays, from your cell phone to all these wind turbines we see, come from China. We're beginning to produce them in a small way in the US, in Australia, etc. but the large deposits and the large workings of rare earths are in China, and almost everything of an advanced electrical nature depends on rare earths. They're the great multiplier. They take an electrical efficiency of, say, 5, and they whip it up to 25. And we use them all the time. And they are coming from China. And China has the ability to really strangle us at will on rare earths. It's not the big machines. It's the little tiny bits inside that are
So the way I
let me say this real fast. Also, 98% of our ibuprofens come from China. 98% of our aspirins come from China. So I think you asked me, is it a trend? You know, in this global kind of situation, if there's a perceived threat to America, well, it should be a trend.
So
I think we shouldn't be so dependent on any one external source of supply. And that is a reflection of the way capitalism has pursued the low-cost, efficient producer. And the low-cost, efficient producer has been in China. I think we're reassessing that. But we're not the only people dependent. When a man called Mendelsohn was in the European Trade Commission in Brussels, he tried to reduce Chinese imports and found out there would be no bras in Europe. And that was not an uplifting situation.
Yeah. So it sounds to me, though, that this is the president decided to toot the horn really loud last Friday for what I perceive is the beginning of an American manufacturing renaissance, like we have never seen before.
Well, I can say without a doubt that I personally have been working with the White House and people there. I have a call coming up with the cabinet member. There's no doubt that there is an absolute thing to bring manufacturing back to America, not just to America, but to the Western Hemisphere and friends. So you know that we used to produce most of the pharmaceuticals in Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of automobiles were produced in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it's a matter like the stock market. You must diversify. But you should see in the coming months bills that will give all kinds of incentives to private companies to bring their operations back to America. Now, remember, manufacturing is not the Henry Ford kind of manufacturing. Right. It's the manufacturing. I can say that I have a conversation with a great friend of mine who used to be mayor of Mississippi. And then we're working with the state of Texas, rounding up entrepreneurs. I say you're exactly right. You should see incentives going to American enterprises. So you're going to sit in a board meeting and you're going to say, they told us to diversify the supply chain in 2008, and we haven't done that. So if you drop your iPhone right now, it can't be replaced. You know, automobile parts from General Motors might have a problem, or any other kind of situation. But I agree with you that all indicators are to me is that the small things, whether it's toothpicks, whether it's napkins, whether it's knives and forks, whether it's shoes, whether it's socks, whatever it is, people would bring not just back to America, but back to whether it's Europe, whether it's Mexico, whether it's Puerto Rico, people that Americans do not see as a threat. And whether or not a threat is real, you know, the purpose of the president of the United States, first of all, he's commander-in-chief of the military and to defend the country.
Yeah. Llewelyn?
Well, I think that there will be some moves to bring things back. It's not the law of the land. This is an executive order by the president, and that's subject to challenge, etc., and a certain amount of ignoring it. It is not a thought-out law. It doesn't have penalties yet, etc. It will take some time to be codified into law and practice. I think it will. It's fired as a shot across the bow, both of the American industry and of the Chinese. We're in great danger of producing, for example, a vaccine which will have to be manufactured for COVID-19, which will have to be manufactured in India. Our natural inclination has become, if you want something manufactured, you go to Asia. we have to correct that. And I like John's attitude that it should come not only back to the US, but to the hemisphere and to Europe, to our allies, to our traditional friends and suppliers, and that we have paid a very high price for efficiency and for the low-cost producer. I've always said that the high cost of cheap is very high indeed. And
Yeah.
that
So,
long-term tends to be the most onerously expensive.
yeah. So we're coming.
High cost of cheap. I just stole that one.
So we're coming to the last 5 minutes here, and I want to make sure that we close with a good song by John. But you know, I noticed that the price of gallon of gas is staying steady at $1.35. Price of oil, crude went up a little bit, like this week. So that's a good thing for all the internal, explorers, developers of oil in the U.S. The barrel needs to be in the $40 to $50 range thing. So it's a good thing for them. So I don't foresee any more problems. However, I want to remind you that just because the price of oil is down and gas is cheap, that's not going to derail the electrification of transportation. Tesla has had some phenomenal success quarters. Production is up. They're going to hit 1 million cars. And the competition coming after them is huge. All the car companies have committed. So electrification is going to increase. So that means the need for more generation of all kinds. Now, if the components of that generation is made in China, then that's going to be a problem going forward. So all kinds of interesting conundrums and opportunities. So, and then the last thing I wanted to share with you is, I told you last week that I finally caught on with the smart people in the broadband world, and I switched from to a new service from Spectrum, and I'm getting 400 megabits. So that this can be done easily. And my mesh router at home is delivering 300 megabits to my kids, who are super happy as they stream their games and everything. So the point being of all this, that I just don't see, Llewelyn and John, how we cannot really see that there is a huge divide happening because of technology and transformation. And it worries me that we are going to, just in the US alone, we're going to have to deal with 50, 100 million, unemployed, homeless people over the next 10 years. I have no idea what it's going to look like, but what's your take on it?
Well, I would go back. First of all, we don't know. It's going to take a lot of political leadership. I think we need a new generation of political leaders, which will come out of this crisis. They'll come out of the cities and the states. It is not on stage in Washington these days, either in power or hoping to be in power after November. I think that you should be very careful about the price of oil. It is devastating for the oil industry at $50 a barrel. It's going to always have the effect. Oil is a commodity. If the price is too low, exploration will decrease. The amount of fracking for oil will decrease. There will be a spike. There is no stability in it. The stability in the price of oil has been provided in the past by collaboration of primarily Saudi Arabia, and then coming into the picture, Russia as its production increased. Now we are the largest producer, and we haven't yet learned how to operate internationally in stabilizing the price of oil with a floor. Henry Kissinger and the oil prices going back into the 1970s stipulated the need for a price floor when everybody was talking about how high prices were. In the middle of the 1980s, the price collapse took down all the banks in Texas, and it was catastrophic. Low prices tend to be catastrophic in any commodity, and you get them almost axiomatically followed by a crisis in supply, and therefore very high prices. And we don't know. We need new social structures. We need a new social contract. It is going to be forced on us. It is not something that we're going to be offered by politicians. It's something that they're going to have to implement if you don't have millions of homeless and millions of desperately, terribly, frighteningly unemployed people as you had in the 1930s, when the national population was about 125 million as opposed to 340 million today.
Yes, let me just, I agree. Let me restate it by saying this is when you depend on the character of your country or the character of a team. We, of course, if won World War I, won World War II, went through a Great Depression, went through Vietnam. We've gone through many crises in America. And as my high school coach used to say, those people from Amite, Louisiana are living on somebody else's reputation. We got to live on our own reputation. This is when the character of a country, this is when the history combines with the future. Because what allows us to look into the future, whether it's financial projections, is what we know about the past. And so we need a new social contract, we need a new vision, but more importantly, it is the character of a country that's being tested now. It is the whole idea that we have done X, Y, and Z in the past, then we can also do X, Y, and Z in the future. We cannot afford to be that company that fails. We cannot afford to be that team that fails. We have to, as Llewelyn said, what he was describing to me, the history is so important. And it is a character that's being tested now in America. And when you test this character in America, it is for individual states, individuals themselves, to look up and say, look, here's the deal. I'm part of a great tradition, and we will get by, for the next number of years. Because if we don't, then we'll be thrown into maybe 2 or 3 Americas. We might have another civil war. Anything can happen. So I just think right now it is the character that is combining history and using the history much like we do financial projection, as Llewelyn said, look, certainly if we can come up with a WPA, we have the character in America to look into the future by creating other structures and coming up with a different contract.
Yeah. Take us away, John.
Woo, okay. What I just said, huh? Let me see. Past is sprinkled with the blame. I got a few old dreams that I can't use, ruled by my memories of things that used to be. There were the smiles before the tears, and with the smiles of better years, ruled by my memories of things that used to be.
God bless you all.
God bless you guys.
Next week.
I got to hear that sometime. I never hear the recording.
Let me stop broadcasting here. Hold on.
I don't know how that song jumped in my head, Llewelyn, about things that used to be, but see,